So today we're looking at the classic Cold War era tank, the T-55. So this one, happy birthday, 65 years old this year. So this one should be sunning itself on the beach, but as we know, this tank was used by over 70 countries and it's still in service today. It's probably one of the most upgraded tanks around the world. It was a very easy tank to use, easy to drive, very easy to maintain, so a lot of countries did like this tank. When the Soviets built this tank, it was for mass production. 83,000 of these tanks were made within the Warsaw Pact countries, and if we include the Chinese copy, the Type 59, this tank probably comes in around about the 100,000 mark. So the armour on the T-55 is about 100 mil thick. So this is angled at about 60 degrees, pretty much the same as what Leopard was. So this gives us a line of sight of about 200 mil. Going to the turret, it's about 205 mil and it's fully cast all the way around. So when this was designed, the 20 pounder was not quite good enough to penetrate this armour on T-54, T-55. So this is where the British now going to developing the 105 L7 gun. So that came out in about 1958 as well. So that was the next upgrade from the 20 pounder to try and be able to combat this tank. There was two sets of tracks for this vehicle. So we got the OMSH, so the open metallic hinge track, metal pins, metal track. A lot of upgrades along the way when we get into RMSH track. So this is a rubber inserted track. So within the actual pins themselves we have rubber bushing, so this is gives it more cushioning and it's a little bit quieter as well. These vehicles were essentially to go over the rolling plains of Europe, so they weren't really meant to go on roads, so they really didn't care about taking care of bitumen. Metal tracks give you that good mobility cross country. Torsion bar suspension, and one of the classic gaps between the first and second road wheel, because when you go across country, the first road wheel is the first one to hit any obstacle. Once you start going over that obstacle, the rest of the road wheels pretty much just go straight up in the vertical plane. Under the covers, this is the V55 V12 diesel engine. This engine went through a lot of development in its time, so we're starting off at around about the 500 horsepower, but we can go right up to the 800s in horsepower for this particular engine. We can air start this vehicle, so if we're in a cold European winter, instead of trying to use your batteries with cranking power, you can just air start these, because with a diesel engine all you need is compression. When we look at what this vehicle was designed for, again rolling across the European plains, we need a lot of fuel. Inside the vehicle we carry about 580 litres. This is not the correct fuel tank for the back, but they did have a fuel tank which carried about 400 litres externally, and around the right hand side we can carry an additional 320 litres. So this vehicle could carry over 1,000 litres of fuel to get it where it needs to go. So when they're driving, they would generally use all their external fuel first. Once they got into their area operations, they would switch to their internal fuel. Now there's always that debate. People say, why do they have fuel on the outside of the vehicle? Well, when you're driving to where you want to go, you use the external fuel. Even if it does get hit, diesel has a high flash point. If your vehicle does catch fire, it's better to be on the outside than having a fire on the inside. So you'd expend all your outside fuel first. Even if it did get penetrated, the fuel would just leak out to the outside. You look at even when we operated tanks during World War II with Matilda, and even the Australian Cruiser Mark IV was supposed to have that extra fuel tank on the back as well. So it's actually good in design and practical use to have external fuel tanks. All right, so the gun, the business end of this tank. This is the 100mm D10T gun, which is a carryover from the SU-100 from World War II. This carries about 43 rounds on board. Now initially this is meant to penetrate about 145 millimetres of armour at about 60 degrees, at about 2,000 metres. This gives us the possibility to be able to penetrate the front glacis plate of Leopard, which is about 140 mil line of sight, at about 2,000 metres. So it does have good penetrating power for its time. When we go up to T-62, we go up to 115 mil, and then T-72, we go to 125s. A lot of variants of the T-55 did get upgraded to the variant of the British L7 as well, so we're going up to that 105 mil. Secondary armament of these, they essentially had two different types of machine guns, but they upgraded to the PKT, the 7.62. carry about 3,500 rounds on board. So here the primary sighting system for the gunner is the TPA 165 day sight. This gives us magnification of about 3.5 up to about ×7 magnification. Behind this cover here is the TSA 2A22 night sight. So this is a very early sighting system for the T-55. We use this in conjunction with the infrared searchlight. We can shoot out to about 400 metres with this sighting system. Like with most tanks, you have handrails, but a lot of these handrails were designed and put on as well because we also carry troops on top of tanks going into battle. So this is something for them to hold on to as we're driving along. It's sort of a carry-on from World War II with the T-34. Having front forward hatches gives you that extra protection as well if you want to have your head out to look what's going on. We have a four-man crew on this tank, so we have the driver in front left, we have the gunner who sits down below, the commander who sits on this side, and before we get into the new auto loader side, we actually have a manual loader. A guy sits on the right hand side there. This is the gunner's position, and looking through his primary sight just here, he's got his power controls. He's also got his manual controls for traverse and elevation. A lot of rounds down in the what we would call a wine rack, but then behind you as well, you've also got additional racking on the turret wall. We've also got extra rounds down on the firewall. So you literally just want to cram in rounds where you can. The only problem is these rounds are all exposed, and as we're still seeing in the conflict at the moment in Ukraine, they're starting to bring these old tanks out, so they still are very vulnerable. Interesting feature while we're here is the difference between the T-54 and the T-55 was in the 55 they added this boron layer here. So this could take anywhere between a 2 to a 15 kiloton nuclear device, and it'll give us nuclear, biological, chemical protection. This is your grab handle, because obviously with these type of vehicles, they can hit what we call a donger, which is essentially a hole in the ground or a raised bit of ground, and you can launch these tanks or drop them into a hole. So you want something to grab hold of. If you need to escape out of these vehicles, because you train on them enough, you know where every little bump and scrape is, and trust me, you can get out of vehicles quickly if you need to. So for a classic Cold War era tank, at about 65 years of age, if you want to see this tank in action, you can go for a ride on this vehicle during AusArmour Fest 2023.